Welcome to Mill History Talk, the podcast where we explore the past to better understand the profession of arms today. We dive into the campaigns, conflicts, issues, and commanders that have shaped military thinking across centuries, and why it all still matters. Whether you're an officer in training, a seasoned professional, a student of strategy, or simply curious about how history informs modern warfare, this space is for you. Our mission is simple: to foster insight, reflection, and critical thinking primarily through the lens of military history. Before we begin, a quick note. The views expressed in this podcast are of the podcast writers, hosts, and guests, and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any government agency or organization. So, whether you're listening in a barracks, a lecture hall, at the gym, or in your car on the way to work, welcome. We're glad you're here. Hey everyone, I'm Hope, your smart, sassy, slightly nerdy tour guide through the battlefields of history. And today we're tackling a man who started life with the nickname Useless and ended it as the general who crushed the Confederacy. Yep, buckle up, because we're talking about Ulysses S. Grant.
And I'm Brian. Grant is one of those figures who confounds expectations. He didn't look like a hero. He wasn't a tactical genius in the Napoleonic mold. He wasn't a charismatic speaker. But he had something else: persistence, steadiness, and the ability to grasp the bigger picture when others hesitated.
Translation: he wasn't here for the drama. He was here to get the job done. And honestly, that's kind of refreshing. So let's start at the beginning. Grant was born in Point Pleasant, Ohio in 1822. His dad ran a tannery, which meant young Grant's childhood smelled like... Imagine leaving a steak out in August with no fridge. He hated it.
But what he loved were horses. From an early age, Grant had this uncanny gift for handling them. Neighbors said he could calm down the wildest horse without breaking a sweat. That skill would define his time at West Point and later in the Army.
And let's not skip over the name thing. He was born Hiram Ulysses Grant, but when a congressman filed his paperwork for West Point, he accidentally wrote Ulysses S. Grant. Instead of fixing it, Grant just rolled with it. Honestly, that's the most relatable clerical error since Starbucks started writing everyone's name as Ashley.
That mistake gave him a new identity: U.S. Grant. Later in the Civil War, people said the initials stood for Unconditional Surrender. Quite the upgrade from Useless, which was the cruel nickname his classmates gave him.
Yeah, kids are mean. But I love this. Grant wasn't some golden boy genius. He was average in school, quiet, and unremarkable. Until it mattered.
At West Point, Grant was a middling student. He ranked 21st out of 39 in his class. He admitted later that military life didn't appeal to him at first, but his horsemanship made him stand out. He even set a high jump record with a horse that wasn't broken until decades later.
Picture it. This modest Ohio kid soaring 6 feet in the saddle while probably thinking, I still hate math, but at least I've got this. Honestly, it's like he was a horse girl. Except he was a horseman, a horse dude, whatever. He was really good at riding.
Socially, he kept to himself. Not a big talker, but respected for honesty and modesty. Those traits, quiet, steady, reliable, would later be strengths on campaign, even if they didn't win him friends at school.
So he graduates, gets posted to the infantry. Notice, not the cavalry, despite being horse guy supreme. It's so true. Some things in the Army never change. So graduation, and then boom, the Mexican-American War kicks off.
In Mexico, Grant got his first taste of combat. He served under Zachary Taylor, whose calm leadership impressed him. At Monterrey, Grant showed remarkable courage, riding a mule along a narrow path under fire to deliver orders. Later, at Chapultepec, he hauled a howitzer into a church belfry to fire down on Mexican troops. These were not the actions of an average officer.
Yeah. Tell me again how this so-called useless guy is out here playing real-life Assassin's Creed Mexico edition. And here's the kicker. Despite proving himself brave, he later called the war one of the most unjust conflicts ever fought. So not only is he brave, he's also like, by the way, this whole thing is shady.
That ambivalence is important. He gained invaluable experience in logistics as a quartermaster and learned to appreciate supply lines, something that would shape his Civil War strategy. But morally, he never shook his discomfort with the war.
And let's not forget, he crossed paths with future Civil War big names. He saw Robert E. Lee in action, and others like Joseph Johnston and Jefferson Davis. Little did they know, round 2 was coming. Let's talk about Julia, his wife and honestly the MVP of Team Grant. They met through her brother, Grant's West Point roommate. Julia came from a wealthy, slave-holding family, which was about as different from Grant's modest background as you can get. But she was bubbly, supportive, and basically his emotional anchor.
They married in 1848 after the Mexican War. Julia's optimism balanced Grant's reserve. Their partnership gave him stability throughout his life, including during the war, when she often traveled to be near him in camp.
And then, civilian Grant. Oh boy. Farming? Fail. Real estate? Fail. Business ventures? Fail. He even lived in a log cabin called Hardscrabble, which is both an adorable name and a dead giveaway that things were not going well.
He also struggled with alcohol during this time, especially when separated from Julia. But it's worth emphasizing, his drinking was episodic, not constant. His closest friends, like Sherman and his chief of staff John Rawlins, kept him in check during campaigns.
And then comes my favorite Lincoln quote ever. When people complained that Grant drank too much, Lincoln said, "Find out what he drinks and send it to my other generals." Whew, iconic. That's presidential shade with a purpose.
When the Civil War erupted in 1861, Grant was clerking in his father's store. Within months, he was commanding troops. His rise was extraordinary. He quickly earned a reputation for discipline and aggressiveness. Belmont, Fort Henry, and Fort Donelson. These early battles put him on the map. His demand for unconditional surrender at Donelson made him a national hero.
Talk about rebranding. From useless to unconditional surrender? Somebody get this guy a PR agent.
Shiloh in April 1862 was a turning point. The Union Army was nearly routed, but Grant steadied his men. When Sherman expressed doubts after the bloody first day, Grant replied, "Yes, we've had the devil's own day, haven't we? Lick 'em tomorrow, though." That calm resolve impressed Sherman deeply.
That's peak Grant energy. Understated, unshakable, maybe slightly terrifying. Honestly, if I'd just survived a brutal surprise attack, I'd want that guy in charge. Speaking of Sherman, let's take a minute for the greatest military bromance of the 19th century. These two were like peanut butter and jelly. If peanut butter occasionally worried about losing its mind, and jelly quietly drank whiskey.
Their trust in one another was extraordinary. Sherman admired Grant's steadiness, while Grant relied on Sherman's energy and execution. At Vicksburg in 1863, Sherman initially doubted Grant's bold plan to cut loose from supply lines, but he later admitted it was a stroke of genius.
And by the end of the war, their letters to each other read like emotional support texts. Sherman literally wrote, "I knew if I got in a tight place you would come, if alive." That's not just a colleague. That's a brother in arms.
Equally important was Grant's relationship with Abraham Lincoln. Unlike other generals, Grant didn't fight with the president. He respected civilian authority and gave Lincoln confidence that the war was in steady hands. Lincoln, in turn, shielded Grant from critics.
And the critics were loud. After the Overland Campaign's massive casualties in 1864, people called him a butcher. But Lincoln refused to back down. His line, "I can't spare this man, he fights," is basically a mic drop on Washington politics.
That trust allowed Grant to pursue his strategy of simultaneous offensives and relentless pressure. He understood that the Union's resources could outlast the Confederacy, but only if the North kept fighting everywhere at once.
So, fast forward to April 1865. Appomattox. Lee surrenders, and Grant writes terms so generous you'd think he was running a hospitality suite. Confederate soldiers got to keep their horses so they could farm after the war. That's not weakness, that's smart reconciliation.
It was consistent with his view that the war had to end in healing, not vengeance. Strategically, he had recognized that destroying Confederate armies, not just taking cities, was the key. That vision marked him as a modern general.
And look, was he perfect? No, people criticized his presidency for corruption scandals among his subordinates. But as a general, he understood the brutal math of industrial war. And he had the backbone to see it through. So, what do we take away from Grant's story? That you don't have to be the smartest, flashiest, or most charismatic person in the room. Sometimes, you just have to be the one who refuses to quit. And maybe also the one with a horse-jumping world record.
He was a man of flaws and contradictions, but also of resilience and clarity. At the moment the Union needed it most, Grant's determination carried the day.
And that's a wrap on today's March Through History. Thanks for hanging out with us. I'm Hope, that's Brian, and this has been Mill History Talk. Remember, history isn't boring. It's full of plot twists, bad decisions, and the occasional guy who accidentally becomes a legend. Until next time, stay curious, stay witty, and maybe don't try hauling cannons into church towers unless you're absolutely sure it's worth it. Catch you later.